Those who may not know me, my name is Cassie, and I help lead organizing and operations efforts here at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. I'm joined here by my two colleagues, Mike Kreisberg, our Policy Research and Advocacy Fellow, as well as Cheryl Daniel, our Senior Communications Manager, who will be helping staff this event this evening. Before we jump in, I just wanted to cover some logistical information for tonight's Zoom. So first, we are currently recording this event as well as live streaming it on Abundant Housing's Facebook page. That is so that more folks can access the information we'll be reviewing. If you don't wish to be captured in the recording, we do welcome you to change your name, perhaps remain camera off, and you can always add your questions and comments in the chat for us to uplift on your behalf. Also, we'd love to get a sense for who's in the space tonight. And so we welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, location. So where are you in Massachusetts or writ large, your role or anything else about yourself that brings you here tonight. And we welcome you to add that to the chat. And in terms of our agenda tonight, we are going to hear from AMA's Policy Research and Advocacy Fellow, Mike Kreisberg, who's really played a leadership role in pushing this bill forward, as well as State Representative Andy Vargas on how to prepare for Wednesday's Joint Committee on Housing hearing, which is hearing specifically bills related to Chapter 40B and production. And we do plan on spending a majority of the time around Q&A. So we'll spend around 30 to 40 minutes. We welcome your active participation. And if questions do arise during speaking remarks, we welcome you to drop those questions in the chat, and we will be sure to revisit those when question and answer comes up. And so without further ado, I will hand things over to Mike. Thank you all for being here.
Well, thanks, Cassie, and thank you again, everyone, for those who signed up to testify, for those who are here tonight, and for those who are members. Obviously, AMA is a membership organization, so there really is no us without you. So thank you again for being supporters of us. So I'm going to just share my screen, get a couple slides going to review the day of logistics for those who are testifying in person and those who are testifying online, and then I'll get into our, AMA's tips for testimony, and then I'll pass it over to Rep. Vargas. Cassie, can you enable screen sharing?
Sorry about that, Mike. I think, Cheryl, if you can do that for Mike.
There we go. Okay, so okay, I think everyone can see what's happening here. So this is for the day of, on Wednesday, we're going to be meeting in front of the Ashburn entrance, which is right off of Ashburton Plaza. For those who are kind of unfamiliar where that is, it is on the right-hand side of the State House. So if you're on Beacon Street is like right around here. This is the front of the State House over here. This is where the Ashburton entrance is, right off of Ashburton Plaza on Bowdoin Street. AMA staff will begin to start gathering there around 1:30 p.m. To welcome those who are coming to testify in person, to gather the troops, so to speak. And so we're going to be meeting there starting around 1:30. You'll see us. There'll be a group of us. We'll probably have our AMA banner there. And then around 1:45-ish, we'll start to head into the State House. Gives us time to work our way through security. Hopefully it's a little bit less crowded at this side of the building. And then we're just going to head in to hearing room B2 right over here, which, the State House is a little bit of a maze, but hopefully with our combined knowledge and power, we'll be able to make it there without getting lost. So that will start to happen a little bit before 2 o'clock. If you don't think that you can make it there right at 1:30 or 1:45, there will be some AMA staff that'll kind of be hanging around outside to make sure that you can find the hearing room a-okay. If you're testifying online, obviously this isn't super relevant for you, but try to be there, try to be at your laptop when the hearing starts around 2 o'clock. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly when you will be testifying or what order the bill will be heard. So just best to be prepared and be there at your computer at 2 o'clock. Make sure you have good lighting, good Wi-Fi, it's a quiet space, all of that good stuff. Oh, another thing before I move on here about like kind of the day of, especially if you're testifying in person, is they kind of expect to be there for the afternoon. Like I said, we don't know when the bill will be heard. Hopefully, we won't have to stay there and sit around until like 5 o'clock, but the legislature can be a bit secretive and we don't know exactly when it'll be your time to testify. But that's why we're going as a group, so we can hang out. There'll be time to kind of chit chat, see what other people are saying, and there's always a little bit of buzz and excitement when you're in the State House. So hopefully it won't be too bad to hang out there. That is it on the logistics. I don't think I see any questions for now, so I'm just gonna power through to the next section here. So as you've probably seen, we sent it out a couple times now, and it's on our website, is that we have a resource packet which has testimony templates for organizations, for individuals. We encourage you to use that. Obviously, we spent some time putting that together, but you don't feel the need to follow it word for word, right? It's just kind of a guideline to give you some sample language. And the first part that we want you to do is really just make it personal. You can talk about your own struggle to find an affordable home, or worry about your children not being able to find an affordable home in the neighborhood that they grew up in. If you're outside of Greater Boston, whether you're in Western Mass, the Cape, Merrimack Valley, wherever, they would definitely emphasize that. Feels that too often we're only hearing about Boston, Greater Boston, and this is really a statewide issue. And we want, and if you're from an area of the state that you feel is like underrepresented, talk about that. See, it's important. Also, if you are in the city of Boston, like if that's where you live, it's important to remember that this bill does not actually directly change Boston's zoning laws. This bill is being passed through the State Zoning Enabling Act, which affects everywhere else in the state besides Boston, which isn't to say that there won't be indirect impacts, but it doesn't change Boston zoning laws in the same way that it would change Stoughton zoning laws. So if you're talking about the fact that you're from Boston, just kind of be aware of that and frame your testimony with that in mind. Then the last thing I want to say about this piece is that legislators know that housing is expensive in Massachusetts. We included some stats that kind of speak to that, but everybody knows it. What they don't know though is your story. Why did you decide to take 3 hours out of your day to schlep over to the State House and to give your testimony and to speak your mind? So we kind of find that is the most powerful point or powerful part of a testimony, is those personal stories, why you feel that it's important, and don't be afraid to make that a large part of your testimony. Second piece here is kind of specific to our bill, and this is kind of specific to the housing abundance agenda or mindset, and that is that we need more homes of all types. So that's rental homes, home ownership, that's income restricted, that's market rate, that's big apartment buildings, that's smaller apartment buildings. We really want to kind of drive home that piece that we need more housing of all types, because we've underbuilt, except for maybe single family homes, we've underbuilt so many different housing types for so long that we need more of everything. And that we can't just rely only on market rate housing. We can't only just rely on income restricted housing to get us out of this crisis. We really need both. Third point here is to center zoning reform, right? This is a zoning reform bill. This doesn't allocate any new money to any housing production programs. So we want to make sure that there's no confusions around that piece. You can kind of really take this in multiple different ways. If you're really passionate about addressing exclusionary zoning and you want to talk about systemic racism, talk about that. If you're in an NBTA community and you want to talk about how important that was for your city or town and how it needs to be brought to other parts of the state, talk about that. And it doesn't always hurt to throw in more good press about MBTA communities. That's always a good thing to say. We're always supportive of it. But right? This is a zoning reform bill. We need to center zoning reform. That is really what we're focused on here. Next piece, which I think is really important, is make the case for now. Why do we need this bill this session? And there's probably hundreds of housing bills. There's 100 different things, solutions to this housing crisis. Why do we need this thing now? And I think you can kind of approach that in a couple different ways. The ones I'll talk about here is the ADU legalization piece in particular can have a near-term impact. In California, where they standardized their ADU laws, they saw like pretty much in the next year to 3 years, a large increase in the amount of ADUs that are being built. So if we do that in Massachusetts, I think it's reasonable to expect that we could also see that kind of immediate or near-term uptick in production, uptick in more affordable homes being built, all of that. The reality is that as long as there are 351 cities and towns with their own rules for ADUs, we're not going to get a lot of ADUs being built. And so this law obviously, addresses that, standardizes it across the state, with the exception, of course, of Boston. And then the second piece is why we need this now, is that it took decades of exclusionary zoning and constraining housing supply to get to where we are today, where we see these astronomical housing prices. And so we kind of need to start that zoning reform early, with the knowledge that it's going to take a little while for the prices to come down and for supply to catch up to demand. This doesn't, like I said, this bill doesn't give any more, doesn't give any money to housing development programs. It's really all about zoning reform and laying the groundwork. Right now, it might not be the best time to build housing because of high labor costs or high interest rates, but with interest rates in particular, those should go down eventually. And when they do go down, and it is a friendlier time to build more housing, we want to make sure that the laws actually allow us to build new housing. So that's the kind of two ways that you can approach making for the case for why we need this bill now, but feel free to think about some of your own ways that why we need this bill now. And then the last piece, pretty obvious, practice, 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 right? When you say something out loud, it always sounds a little bit different than you expected. Some things might sound like better on paper than they do when you say it out loud, and you're only going to find that out, of course, by saying it out loud. Also, like if you're speaking in front of people, especially in person, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, and the more you've practiced it, the more like your muscle memory will kind of take over, and it'll just go a little bit smoother. And then lastly, the testimony should be really limited to at most 3 minutes. You're not going to know that unless you say it out loud, and out of respect for legislators and out of respect for other people who are waiting to testify, really try as hard as you can to keep it to 3 minutes. I don't think they're going to rip the microphone away from you if you go 3:15 or 3:30, but just something really to keep in mind is you want to keep it as close to 3 minutes as possible. So kind of threw a lot at you right there. Those are our 5 main tips. It's not, obviously there's more that we could talk about, but I'm going to stop there for now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Has Cheryl, do you know, or Cassie, has Rep. Vargas joined the chat?
It doesn't look like he has, unfortunately. So let's just give it a few more minutes and see if he's able to join. In the meantime, Mike, we actually had a question in the chat that about the specifics of the bill that I know you can answer, and I thought it would be helpful to answer out loud, which is when you say that the bill doesn't impact Boston, does that include outlying areas such as Somerville, Medford, etc.?
Yeah, so it totally covers those areas as well. It really just is talking about Boston proper, where these zoning laws won't directly take effect. Somerville, Medford, Quincy, Dedham, all those places are covered.
Perfect. Thank you. And then one more question. Oh, perfect. Rep. Vargas is here. Hi, Rep. Vargas.
Hey everybody, I'm so sorry I'm late and I'm in the middle of a softball game that I double scheduled for tonight. I apologize. I just want to jump on and thank you all for being here at the briefing and for working on this bill. There's a lot of talk around the state about our housing crisis and a lot of talk around the state about our competitiveness here in Massachusetts. And I think this is a bill that does the best job at getting at both of those issues. But we can't get it done without you. I mean, if we have great ideas inside the building, as legislators, that's all they are. If we don't have a strong coalition on the outside that's building a grassroots mobilization to get this bill the attention that it deserves and the prioritization that it deserves. There's 6,000 bills that are filed every single session. So that's why your testimony, your advocacy makes a huge difference in making sure that this legislation gets prioritized. So I just want to jump on and thank you guys. And like I said, no bills get passed on Beacon Hill without strong coalitions and advocacy happening outside the building. And we really appreciate the role that you're all playing.
Thank you so much, Rep. Vargas, for making time to be here.
Absolutely. And no pun intended. I hope we all hit a home run at the hearing on Wednesday. I'm doing my best to produce on the diamond right now so we can produce more housing. So I appreciate Abundant Housing for always calling the balls and strikes as it is.
We love to hear it. Rep. Vargas, do you have to leave us now or do you have time for maybe a few questions from folks?
I have time for one or two quick questions. I just got out, so hopefully my teammates can hit around the order again.
Okay, awesome. Do folks on the Zoom have questions specifically for Rep. Vargas? Yes, Tom. Oh, okay, let's go to Bob and then Tom.
I see a question from Tom in the chat. How would you respond to legislators feeling that we are already past the MBTA communities law? Why shouldn't we let that play out before considering a sweeping new law? So a great question. I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. I'll offer one way, and I'm sure the folks at Abundant Housing have other thoughts as well. The MBTA communities law only focused on, frankly, the greater Boston area. Leaves out the rest of the state where there are other transit nodes. And so ironically, if these communities are worried about the fact that they're the focus of the MBTA communities law, this is a way for us to say, no, the rest of the state is now going to be doing the same thing that you're doing, because it's so important for us to distribute the housing supply and demand across the state. And this is a way to do that. So ironically, it's a way to make sure that other cities and towns are also doing their fair share, not just the MBTA communities that were passed under the other bill. And the other sort of part of the question, which is why don't we let something settle in before we pass something else? Every year that goes by, every day that goes by is another unhoused family, is another company that thinks about relocating somewhere else because their families or workers can't afford to live here. And so we can't wait for, to get everything perfect, right? We have to start making some progress every single day, every single session. And this is another way to continue to make progress. And by the way, when we think about what other states have done, like, this is an incredibly reasonable bill, right? I mean, California has just banned single family zoning, right? Like, there's all sorts of other examples that have gone even further than this bill. And so we think this is a very reasonable next step for us to take as a Commonwealth.
Thank you so much, Rep. Vargas. And just one more question for you from Justin in Cambridge. What kind of testimony do you think your colleagues specifically will find most effective?
I think personal testimonies and stories are most effective, right? We get buried in statistics and data and legalese all the time. But when you can talk about your personal story or that of somebody that you know or someone that you support in your community or your family, that really pulls more at the heartstrings than just issuing a bunch of data. So I would think about what personal narrative you have or somebody in your network has that you could bring to the table. I would also highlight, that there's a lot of times discussion has become about, are you for rent control or against rent control? And the housing conversation is a lot broader than that. As this bill deals with some of those broader issues that get at the root causes of our housing shortage. So, I think, focusing on those two things, that this is a broad, comprehensive, common sense bill, and the personal narrative that you can bring to the table, either for your own housing story or that of somebody that you know in your family, your network, or your community.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We were just talking about that right before you joined, encouraging the personal storytelling. Well, we want to respect your time, Rep. Vargas. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited to see you on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you all. I think the other thing I just add at the end is that, saying the city or town that you're from and making clear that, we're hopeful that people at the local level can make the best decisions on a project by project basis, but that we shouldn't hang our hat on that because clearly it hasn't happened up until this point. And so therefore, we all find that the state has a responsibility to ensure that there's equity and that there's housing production happening across the state, because if we don't, we can't continue to rely on 351 cities and towns to hopefully do the right things. We have to make sure that we both incentivize it and in cases where people don't want to get there, we have to mandate it. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Rep. Vargas. We'll see you Wednesday. I think his audio was cutting out a little bit, but I hope folks were able to hear that. And so would love to just continue the conversation, and AMA staff will make every effort to answer any questions that are in the chat. And then of course, if there are folks in the space who also might have answers to questions or ideas, we'd welcome you to share them. And so James had a question. While other states, California for one, have passed bills that directly overrule zoning passed by cities and towns, the MBTA communities law just pressures the cities and towns to act to change their own zoning, which seems like a very slow process. Which approach is the YIMBY bill taking to affect change? Is this something, Mike, that you'd feel comfortable addressing?
Yeah, there's like a little bit more clarity on what you mean just pressures, because it's my understanding, that the law is, not an optional thing. Like cities and towns must comply with those new regulations, and our zoning bill kind of does the same thing. But how it works in the way we phrase it is that cities and towns cannot pass zoning regulations that would, prevent ADUs from being built, or that cities and towns cannot have zoning regulations that prevent multifamily housing around transit. So it's my understanding with the MBTA communities bill and with our bill too, that it's not a pressuring, it's a mandatory, that you have to comply. And if you don't, then, the state has the right to take action against that. Does that help answer your question, James?
Well, my concern is that I mean, yes, I know it's mandatory, but a fair number of cities and towns have said, we don't care, we're not going to do it. There's a whole bunch of steps. I mean, it seems to me to be a slow process where first the rules get promulgated, cities and towns have a year or so to give you just a hint of what they might do. Then there's another year to make a plan, then the plan has to be made, then the plan has to be acted on. And I don't know the California laws, but it seems that they're doing something more direct, that they're somehow affecting a change that overrules what the cities and towns are doing, rather than simply prodding, pushing, smacking, whatever the cities and towns to take an action on their own.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification. I think it is a bit of an open question as to, what the state will do when or if cities and towns don't comply with the MBTA communities. I mean, the Attorney General has obviously issued a statement, but we haven't really crossed that that conflict yet. I can't speak to all of California's changes. I know that some of them do kind of have set a future date with which you need to comply by. I think that probably is the result of some negotiations within the legislature, just trying to get people on board, and so it doesn't seem so sudden. I think from our perspective, obviously we want to push for as quick as possible, and we want that to happen as quick as possible. But there probably will be pushback to that. I will say that for the zoning reform piece in our bill, we go on a timeline, but the ADU piece does not have a timeline. That could of course change, but we're trying to be as aggressive and realistic as possible.
Thank you so much, James. And I will just add that I think one of the sort of unfortunate things about sort of the makeup of our of our state and our sort of gubernatorial, or not gubernatorial, but the way that we function is we do tend to be a very parochial, local first state in which we want to honor local control, but that can oftentimes be at our own impediment. And we're seeing that with housing. And so when I talk to colleagues in California, that doesn't tend to be the sort of same narrative at the State House in terms of local control. So I think that's a really interesting element to consider. But thanks so much, James, for that question. And then, so the next question is, Dana asks, what do we recommend for people who can't speak in person, but want to help get the bill passed?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dana. I think, that the first thing is it's not too late to submit written testimony. We'll share at the end of this call the email and contact information to submit written testimony in support of it. There is also you can contact your senator and your representative either on your own or through our own letter writing campaign, asking them to support the bill. There's just kind of like that, all politics is local, talk to your friends and family, talk to your neighbors, try to get support for the bill that way. If you have social media to promote this bill through those channels. But I would say that for right now, in the spirit that the hearing is being held this week, submitting a piece of written testimony would be the most important thing you can do.
And is there a deadline or suggested deadline for submitting written testimony, Mike? I've gotten that question a few times.
Yeah, it doesn't say on the website. I've seen for previous bills, they kind of give maybe to the week after, to the following Monday. So I'm not sure how hard a deadline it is, but just for your own peace of mind, everyone's peace of mind, as soon as you get it in, then it's submitted and it's done.
Great, thank you so much. And then great question from Robbie that I think is worth voicing over for folks that maybe can't see the chat. Wondering for folks that are testifying in person, what are the attire recommendations? We do recommend business to business casual if that's accessible to you. I know AMA team will be dressed in the best that we can. So just for everyone's learning, that's what we're suggesting you wear. Thanks for that question. And then Ned just added some great commentary specifically around the MBTA communities law implementation, thinking about one of the carrots being losing housing choice funds for some of these communities. That could be a really effective lever that we're hoping does what it should. Awesome. Well, I'm wondering, and then, sorry, one more question from Bob. Are Mike's slides going to be available? We do plan on emailing logistical information to anybody that's indicated interest or signed up for testifying, and we can absolutely make those slides available. Are there any other questions that maybe haven't been addressed that folks have in the space tonight?
Also, in the meantime, I know that Rep. Vargas kind of gave an answer to Tom's question about, why, if legislators are feeling like we've already passed a zoning reform bill, why do another? I can kind of give an AMA answer to that as well. I think the main piece is that, there are pieces in our bill that weren't part of the MBTA communities law that are common sense, that, are basic, particularly ADUs, that we should get passed, and it shouldn't matter that we passed another zoning reform a couple of years ago. I'm sure obviously we would agree with this, but this is, to legislator, what you might say. And then also the other big piece about expanding multifamily housing around transit is that we've already agreed that that's a good idea to do in MBTA communities. And so logically, there's no reason that we shouldn't also bring that to other transit around the state. It's not something particularly special about an MBTA community stop in Westwood that can get multifamily housing, but it can't happen in Springfield. So just kind of expanding that. We've already agreed that this is a good thing. We don't need to have that debate again.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any final questions before we share all of the great resources mentioned and close for tonight? Awesome. Well, we are here. If folks have any additional questions, we will drop all of our resources in the chat. So Cheryl is sharing a link to our website that includes our resource packet. It includes the contact information for where to send written testimony. She'll also share our social media handles where you can write to us if you have any other questions. The last thing I do want to share is in the next day, you'll be hearing from me directly if you signed up to testify. I'm going to ask if you would like to opt into a group text so that we can keep in touch with ease during the day of the hearing. And so just stay on the lookout for an email from me. And we are so excited about Wednesday, and we're really honored that you chose to be here tonight and that you're taking your valuable time to testify on Wednesday. And we are here if you have any further questions. Oh, and we also value your feedback. So if you have feedback about this event, we would welcome you to fill out the form that Cheryl just put in the chat. Thank you, Cheryl. Justin, yeah. I love the plug for the AMA Discord. You can join that too. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks very
everyone.
much. No.
Thanks, Tom. See you Wednesday.